Welcome to Changing the Conversation. This podcast explores the mix of diversity, culture and tech innovations in our industry. Join us as we sit down with trailblazers, thought leaders and innovators who are reshaping the landscape of insurance, bringing you stories that redefine the narrative. We are your guide to the evolving landscape of insurance. This is Changing the Conversation, brought to you by Mackay.
Ed, I am so grateful to you for joining me on Changing the Conversation. We've crossed paths several times over the last few months, and this has been yes, we must do this. So we're finally here. Thank you for joining me.
Delighted to be joining. Thanks. Yeah, it's been a while, a long time coming, I think.
It has indeed. So you are the man to speak to about all things Insurtech, and your background speaks to that. I wonder if you can just give us a bit of an overview about who you are and how you've come to be at the kind of forefront of insurance innovation, if you like.
Well, thanks. By fluke, really. The reason I'm where I am is because of the Lloyd's Lab, which is where I'm sat right now as well. But it was the opportunity to open and run the Lloyd's Lab in 2018 that got me to where I am. Before that, I started as an engineer. I've got a master's degree in mechanical engineering, started in defence engineering, went to KPMG, became a management consultant, did a lot of stuff in innovation and tech and data for quite a while, but never in insurance. And so it was when I saw in 2018 that Lloyd's wanted to open a innovation lab. And I thought, well, I know nothing about insurance, but surely that's to my advantage in an innovation lab. And pitched myself in that way and managed to luck out and get it. So that's how it happened. I think my background in engineering gave me this kind of experimental mindset, I guess, and ability to, or willingness to try new things. And the rest is kind of, Lloyd's Lab is done really well, and the rest is kind of history, I guess.
So you started in 2018 in Lloyd's Lab. What were the first kind of thoughts, lessons, theories you had around what insurance needed?
I didn't have a clue. I didn't know. So I kind of joined to open the Lloyd's Lab, and I thought there were maybe like 10 Insurtechs out there. I didn't have a clue. I just loved the idea of coming to the Lloyd's marketplace and innovating and trying new things and disrupting it. I loved the history and the tradition of the Lloyd's market because I knew a lot about it. I'd been to the building before. I'd never done a day of insurance work. And I just didn't know what to expect, but I thought it'd be fun trying to find out. So I just took a leap of faith, to be honest, that something would be good. I was on a fixed term contract. It could have all ended miserably. Didn't know what I was doing. I would join meetings. I didn't know what anyone was talking about. I didn't know all the things they were doing were. I didn't know anything. So it was quite a jumping in the deep end, to be honest. But when I discovered how broad and diverse the world of Insurtech is and how many things are going on, how cool they are, I just fell in love with it really quickly.
Tell me where you are now. You're CEO of 2 companies. Tell me about those and how you've evolved to there.
4 years in the lab was fantastic. Learned loads, loved it. It was great, but it was enough to then go and do something else. And the natural thing was to go and work in a startup, right, in Insurtech. So I'm running IRL, Innovative Risk Labs. We're a broker. We became a Lloyd's broker last year, and we're dedicated to Insurtech. So what we do is help launch new Insurtech MGAs, essentially, grand term, but kind of Insurtech MGAs in the UK. And then as a Lloyd's broker, we help Insurtechs get capacity from the Lloyd's market. And we do that because 4 years of running the Lloyd's Lab, I know lots of underwriters that do Insurtech stuff or innovative stuff. And, I kept on getting people approach me saying, can you help me get capacity here? And I thought, well, I may as well be a Lloyd's broker then if we're going to do that. So that was that. One of my clients was David and Cecily, who had this idea for something called Just Parent. And after a long time working on it, they basically decided to move on. Capacity for it was really hard to get because it's complete first of its kind. And that's the second business, because we then decided, well, if you're not going to do it, maybe we'll do it. And we did an agreement, took over the IP, and managed to launch in March the UK's first parental leave insurance, Just Parent. So I'm doing both businesses until we figure out how we're going to really grow Just Parent, whether it's bring someone in and do it properly, or I do both, or what. We're kind of in the early days of figuring that out.
So you're a very busy man.
I do stuff I enjoy, so it kind of doesn't feel so busy then, does it?
I had the conversation with my kids the other day. I always butcher the phrase, but it's something along the lines of, if you do something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And
Yeah.
I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely days that aren't so fun. It's like a roller coaster, It depends on what mood you catch me in. Some days it's like everything's amazing, other days the world is ending. But I think generally it's on the up rather than on the down.
Oh, brilliant. So you joined in 2018, not knowing anything about insurance, and now you are running two innovative tech-based insurance-orientated companies. What, from your perspective, are the really pressing needs that the insurance industry has today? What and how, I suppose, do your products fill those? I'm thinking specifically about Just Parent, but IRL as well.
I mean, what's the need of insurance in terms of helping innovation happen, or generally in terms of insurance? Because there's a lot of things that insurance can improve, I guess.
Well, maybe one and the both. What are the really sort of top three areas that you're seeing through your perspective of what needs to change and how it is changing now? And it might be tech orientated, it might be wider than that.
I think it's just like the industry is so big that you can say it's terrible and you can say it's amazing, and you'll be right both times. It just depends on what your experience is and who you're working with, right? So the Lloyd's market is thousands of people. There's, 50, 60 managing agents, maybe 90 or so syndicates. There's a lot going on just in the Lloyd's market. Then there's the London market. Then there's everything else as well. So that's just UK. So if you go and work with one syndicate or one insurer, a big MGA, then you might think everything is amazing and we've really got insurance innovation right. And you go to another and it's like, oh my God, this is archaic. So it's kind of hard to give a view. I think generally more and more are taking up kind of innovation and tech and doing better as they go. But there are some businesses that just do really, really well regardless, and they don't need to really innovate, or they feel they don't, and they do very well still. And they're like, no, why bother? And they do great business. I think over time those will slowly just disappear. But I think the question as to what needs to change is really dependent on the kind of business and where they're at. I'm lucky enough to work mainly with the good insurers that otherwise I wouldn't be working with them, that are willing to innovate and try new things. And I think with those, I think the thing that I guess we're looking for is generally it's, although they might have pockets of really good stuff, I think generally we need to get everyone on better data, the better the data, the easier it is to move and change things and understand what's going on. But I think the core thing is about how having people motivated to make change happen and not be motivated to hold back. Sometimes we can be a bit risk averse. Insurers are in the business of business of risk, but they're also super risk averse, and trying to help them to take a bit more measured risk in certain places would be really helpful.
I did a podcast with Brian Falchuk. I've done a couple with him. I don't know if you know him. He's from the US. And he has this kind of life philosophy that he's brought into innovation and insurance, which is, instead of all of the reasons why we can't, how might we? So his question is, how might we? Forget all the reasons we can't, but just how might we? And what changes could we make thinking outside the box? And one of the things that you said earlier in this conversation is how you came to the insurance world knowing nothing about insurance. And that was to your advantage, because you can see blockers that perhaps everybody in the world has just accepted. What, with innovation, you're always challenging those norms. And there's obviously a lot of resistance. And as you've mentioned, insurance is steeped in history and has an awful lot of things are done because they've always been done this way. Can you tell me how you deal with that innovation versus resistance, and maybe give me some examples about some of the kind of the main significant challenges that you faced during your journey?
Well, I think when you've got profitable businesses, that is always makes it difficult to justify change. And then when you've not got profitable businesses, it's difficult to justify change because you haven't got the money to do it, because everyone scales back funding. So I guess you're in that position where when things are good, you're like, well, why do you mean to do it? And when things are bad, you're like, well, we haven't got any money to do it. So it's kind of a cycle that you need to get out of. In terms of my experience of innovation, I think it's all about the people and getting the right people on board in a business and having them motivated in the right way. So I've worked with loads of, whether it's claims teams or underwriters or whatever, that are really pro-innovation, but they don't work in a silo. They need to work with other people in the business. And it's when they go to the other people that they have the real difficulty in getting things to happen, whether it's getting access to certain data, whether it's getting approval to do something, whether it's getting wordings approved and read, or getting compliance to agree to something. There's always like multiple other parties that need to come together. And I think the insurers that do this well have really kind of great teams that are able to work together across these different parts of the business and are all motivated to try something new and not worried about failure necessarily, because they see it as an experiment and they're going to try something new and they like that and they get excited by it, and perhaps they get measured and their performance gets measured by it, by experimenting and trying new things. I think that's when it works really well. So yeah, my experience, it's about that, and it's also about determination. So going to Just Parent, myself and Hayley Maynard, the underwriter, and a couple of her colleagues, like we worked really hard, pushed to get that live. And part of, I think, what really helped us was getting momentum. Like sometimes people sit on things for like a few weeks or a couple of weeks and you don't really gain momentum and there's no sense of urgency. But we decided to give ourselves a target deadline. And then we just went all guns blazing. They would take a look at the wording, make some changes. Within a few hours, I'd make my changes. Next day, they'd make their changes. Then we'd think about it for a couple of days, come back, have a meeting, go over it. And it changed. But we got the momentum such that we kept the energy going and we were all motivated to see it done. Whereas sometimes if you don't really give yourself a deadline and you just let things tick along, you just don't get that kind of drive to finish it. And when we're also motivated and pushing and working hard to do it, we then get that passion across to the other people within the insurer that need to approve it, and then we get something to work. So I think in some of the cases I've done things, it's that passion and momentum that helps get things to happen. Because ultimately a lot of stuff can happen. It's just about bringing people along and making, stopping them from blocking you.
You find that is harder the bigger the companies that you're dealing with, that to keep that passion momentum when it goes several links down the chain from you and you're kind of relying on those people to keep the passion and motivation going? How do you manage that?
Well, it can do, but it depends on how they set themselves up. So if you take the Lloyd's Lab, for example, when I was here and we were trying new things, we were able to try new things and get stuff done quite quickly, despite being in basically a regulator. And what we did to achieve that was with Trevor Maynard, my boss at the time, is that we basically kind of agreed the boundaries of what we're allowed to do. And then we just didn't ask for permission to do stuff we knew we were allowed to do. And we tried to keep those as broad as possible. One thing that I really liked that we did is we had a half day with comms and PR at Lloyd's. And we kind of went through a load of stuff with them, like in a workshop. And at the end of that, we wrote down a bunch of principles. And we got everyone to literally sign on the wall next to these big principles. And there were things like, we're competent, and as in the lab team is competent, and we can be trusted to do stuff, but also sometimes we'll make mistakes. And if we make mistakes, we can repair them and move on. It's not the end of the world. And we had these kind of principles that meant that we could do stuff without worrying about it. And if we had, and it happened sometimes, comms would say to us, you're not allowed that tweet or something, or you shouldn't have done that, then we just delete it and then move on and don't worry about it. And that, I think, was great because it just meant that we could just do stuff and move quickly without having to go through loads of sign-offs all the time. And so for us, even though it's a big organization, I say big, I mean, not compared to some of the insurers, but in terms of being a place for the politics and rules and being a regulator, being able to move quickly and do stuff was really to our advantage.
Some of the stuff that I'm hearing from you are the critical pillars that you've been able to work within, and I say critical in terms of success, are passion, motivation. I'm going to call it non-judgment, but I mean that in the way that, yes, everyone makes mistakes, that's okay. We live and we learn by them. It's all very much around culture and getting that right. And culture, I think, sometimes is a bit of a tick box and people don't really know what to do with it. But I love the fact that you started with a set of principles that we're competent, trust us, but we're also going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Like that feels like a really strong working environment to encourage creativity, which is essentially what this is about. How does culture and diversity, how does it like influence what you're doing? Am I right in bringing that in here? What's your experience of it, etc.?
Culture is hugely important. You take a person in one business who's not able to get stuff done, put them in another business, same person, same skills, and they could be super successful because of the culture, because of people being willing to listen to what they've got to say or being willing to experiment and learn. So I think culture is this thing that you can't really, I'm sure some people can measure it in certain ways, but it's just one of those things that's not necessarily written down as a rule. It's something which kind of just the way people operate. So culture is super, super important. In terms of diversity, I think what you need is diversity of thought, and that can come in lots of ways. And, sometimes we look at diversity in terms of things that are very visual, whereas I think diversity is what are you bringing to the table that's different to someone else. Maybe you grew up in a different part of the world. Maybe you just grew up in a different kind of family life and a different way of, and maybe you went to a different course. You did engineering versus doing something in the arts. And if you come to the table with something that's different to what everyone else is bringing, then you can bring a different view and hopefully help people change their perception and learn from something else. I mean, at the end of the day, innovation is about applying ideas in new ways that are commercially valuable. And so innovation isn't necessarily about creativity. It's not about creating something brand new necessarily. It's about taking things that are out there already, applying them in a new way, and doing it in such a way that's commercially valuable. So people who have experiences in a whole different walks of life can relate and bring their experience into into a workplace and apply it in a different way and be successful off it. So, yeah, for me, just to summarize like that, diversity is about diversity of thought and, having a room of people that perhaps all haven't had the same path in life is quite important.
I think that's really interesting. And I like the idea that we're talking about diversity of thought, which can sometimes be represented in a visual sense, as you've mentioned, but also we should be looking deeper. We should be looking really at the different experiences and paths people have taken. And I find that fascinating and is actually really relevant to my current personal circumstances. So thank you.
Well, you take like people who have like classic introvert versus extrovert. If you're in a meeting room, the extroverts will typically be saying a lot, but you've got to make sure you listen to one or two things that the introvert says. If they, it depends on the environment, because it's probably very important. If they're going to speak up and say it, then it's something you want to really listen to. Or you've got, actuaries typically are very numbers based, very, very, they might be thinking about things in different ways to someone who's very creative and thinking about solutions and problems and challenges in different ways. It could be very numerical, could be looking at history, you could be looking at real life experience of something happening. And if you bring all the different angles together, you perhaps have a better solution at the end of it.
Somebody told me once, I won't name names, but mostly because I can't quite remember, about a workshop they did. And I think it was one of the big insurers that put the workshop on, where they had a group of people in a room and they all had some problems to solve. And maybe halfway through, they split them up, seemingly randomly. But what it really was extroverts versus introverts. And the extrovert table were told they're not allowed to use words. I'm totally going to butcher this, but the feeling stayed with me. They're not allowed to use words, and the introverts had to use words. And what essentially happened was a whole new world of ideas came out, because previously this group had been dominating. And I found that really fascinating. I have not got that right at all, but it was that kind of vibe. I thought it's really, really fascinating when you look at different people and different paths. And I've been thinking about it recently from a parent perspective as the pathway children take, and some kids just aren't suited to the mainstream pathway. And what does that mean? Is that a bad thing? Is it because it's different, it's unknown? could, and it was something that you've been talking about data. So it just made me think, well, actually, maybe I should be looking at the facts around any decisions I've got to make, the data around it. So I find it really fascinating how often the principles that I talk about in Changing the Conversation, which is about insurance, are absolutely applicable to every single walk of life. It's people, it's passion, it's boundaries, it's freedom. I find it fascinating. On that kind of vein, what's your vision for the future of insurance? And I'm thinking specifically around the contributions that you're making in your world. So that kind of pillar, what do you hope to see in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'd like to see it become easier to experiment and learn. I'd like to see it become easier for insurtechs and innovative ideas within corporates, like entrepreneurship, to happen quickly and people to learn from it. So I think I'd like to see in a few years' time that it's much easier for insurtech startups or even entrepreneurship opportunities to happen more quickly and to go through the cycle of idea through to testing and learning and whether it works or not more quickly. I think one thing that is just really painful in insurtech and innovation right now has been for a long time is how slow it is. So, for example, I've been working with a startup that's been developing their idea for a year. Or in fact, another one had their idea going for a year and waiting for the UK capacity to go live, right? And they're trading in another jurisdiction, but I've been waiting for a year to get UK live. And it's very frustrating. So speeding up that cycle would be really good. And I think making it easier to find capacity for innovative new ideas. So at the moment, it's basically, who do you know? And I know a lot of underwriters, so that's really helpful, but it's still not easy and it's still very slow. And, people change their appetites. So one thing I'm doing with Insurtech UK is that we're going to be doing a report. It's not announced yet, but it'll come out soon, hopefully. We're going to do a report to be launched probably next year where we're going to be interviewing underwriters from across different classes of business and understanding what their appetite is and getting a feel for them about whether they work with Insurtech or innovative new businesses. If so, if not, why not? And hopefully we could get to a point, maybe it will work where we can do every couple of years do a report on the state of capacity. Because capacity for insurtechs is just one of the most painful, difficult bits. Capacity and distribution, they're both huge and both really difficult. Distribution is really dependent on the type of product, but capacity thing is kind of similar challenge every time. And I'd like to be able to help unlock that, get a better view of all the businesses that are out there, all the insurers or big MGAs that can help launch new products, help kind of get real transparency over what kind of business they're looking for and speed up that journey of somebody having a great idea through to wanting to get capacity and get it launched. So I think for me, I'd just love to see that cycle, that timeline reduce a lot. And then we can test ideas more quickly and adapt them, see if they work, drop them, move on if not. But yeah, for me, capacity is a big one.
I think it's brilliant. You just said get ideas, test them and move on if they don't work. And somebody once said to me, there'll be lots of mistakes and there'll be lots of ideas that fail. Let's just fail quickly, know what's gone wrong and then restart. And I think I can see capacity and distribution being two of the main problems in doing that quickly.
Yeah, well, the kind of fail fast thing, I get it, but I think it has a bit of a negative spin for too many people and it rubs some people up the wrong way, whereas experiment and learn, I feel is kind of basically the same thing, but it's kind of putting the emphasis on learning and acknowledging that it's an experiment. And if you go in that mindset that this is, experiments are limited in scope, right? And they have a defined outcome, something you're looking to measure at the end of it, what worked, what didn't. And I think if you think of it in that sense, it's more palatable. And I think people have the right mindset, whereas fail fast, I think kind of has a bit of a cowboy air to it for some people and doesn't land very well. So I much prefer to think of things as experiments and experiments that you can learn from.
I like that very much. Ed, I think what you're doing is incredible and I look forward hopefully to maybe having another conversation in a year or so to just see what's developed, whether, if how the research went with Insurtech UK and all of that kind of stuff. I just want to thank you very much. It's been very insightful talking to you.
No worries. Well, it's been great talking to you, Sarah. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you for tuning in to another enlightening episode of Changing the Conversation. If you enjoyed today's insights and want to stay connected with the latest industry trends, be sure to subscribe, rate and leave a review. Feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our website to share your thoughts and suggestions, or even to nominate someone whose contribution deserves to be heard. Until next time, this is Sarah Myerscough signing off from Changing the Conversation.